Emmanuel and Robbie to come join me on stage. Thank you all for joining us. I'm playing the part in your programs reserved for my Bloomberg colleague, Ashley Vance, who didn't quite make it here today. But I think instead of trying to play too much air traffic control here, let me just start, Caroline, with you. And why don't you just all introduce yourselves, and maybe we could get 2 more microphones up here too. Introduce yourselves and tell us about your company and perhaps even your experience with hypergrowth.
Right. So my name is Caroline Vion. I work with BCG Digital Ventures. That's an incubator, so we build startup together with corporates, so large companies, and we invest in them as well. We're about, does that work?
Oh yeah, sure, yes.
So we are about 4 years old, and we're now about 700 people around the world, so I think hypergrowth is something that we feel. And the challenges around diversity, the challenges around recruiting, the quality of recruiting and integration, really building a community and not losing who we are and what's important for us while still delivering. That's something that we live and we struggle with and we fight for every day.
Amy?
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy, a technology council member for GLG, a consulting firm. And so what I do is provide consulting and advisory advice for startups, equity firms, Fortune 500s, and I've even worked for the US federal government, working around technology, doing strategic operations, scaling globally, and also launching tech products to market. And just one fun thing, the most fun product that I've ever built was managing and building a content delivery network. And for those of you who may not be familiar with what a CDN is, it is the infrastructure of the internet. That served about 10% of the internet's traffic. So that was the best project that I've ever worked on before.
Hi, I'm Emmanuel Freund, the CEO of Blade. At Blade, we are doing the next generation computer. Basically, what we're saying is that computers are obsolete. Today, computers are obsolete. And thanks to the cloud, thanks to unique technologies, you can do much better. You can do more powerful, more green, more cheap, more whatever. Better computer, basically. So we are really the kind of startup that launched 2 years ago with 6 people in a garage, like a really startup stereotype. And just after, like, it went quite well. And in 2 years today, we are more than 120 people. We have more than 20,000 clients. We are in 2 continents. So actually, hypergrowth was our main challenge.
And I'm Rob Easton. I lead the consumer product team for sharing on Instagram. I've been at the company for about 2 years, and my team's been responsible for building products like Stories, Live, direct messaging, Feed, and a bunch of others.
Robbie, the word hypergrowth is one of these peculiar kind of pieces of Silicon Valley jargon. So let's get a little more specific. What is it? What do we mean when we talk about hypergrowth?
I think the way I think about hypergrowth is it's an environment where the default state is growing very fast for both the customers and the business. And one way I like to think about it from an organizational perspective is your job, because you're in an environment that's growing so fast, effectively 1 year later needs to be 2 or 3 times bigger and broader than it is today just to maintain with the pace of growth in the company. So if you feel like that's your job, you are probably working at a company that's going through a hypergrowth phase.
Yeah, hypergrowth, it seems like a great thing for a startup, right? It's something that all entrepreneurs would welcome, and yet it's really the most dangerous stage for a company. I kind of liken it to a Formula One race car, where if you're going that fast, the engine overheats, the wheels come off, and maybe you hit the wall. Emmanuel, what do you see? You're obviously in the middle of a hypergrowth stage at Blade. What do you see as the opportunity and the challenges of hypergrowth?
Well, the best moment to describe actually was 1 year ago. We were 20, and we were a very close team, with all passionate, all in one direction, and working super fast. And suddenly, we just raised 60 million, and so in 2 months, we went from 20 people to 60 people actually. And it means that 70% of all the company were new people just asking themselves if they were in the right spot, in the right company, and if they will if they will stay on this company. So the main challenge at that time was actually to make sure that those 60 people were still as passionate and as still fast-paced as the first 21. And yes, there's a lot of challenges because you're bigger. Of course, you can do bigger things in a very small time, but at the same time, you need to manage that, and that's really hard, actually.
Amy and Caroline, what is a piece of advice you would give a client or a portfolio company that is in the midst of a hypergrowth phase?
I would say build systems to accommodate for that hyper growth. I think referring back to Emmanuel's, scaling it from employees from to up to 60 employees, right? 60 to 120 employees. You need to have communication systems in place so that the culture is able to transcend from the core leadership team all the way to from 60 to 120 people, and also decision-making systems so that, when you go from a scale of 60 to 120, the decision-making processes will update because there are just so many more people, and the decision makers will update probably, most likely.
Right, and I think that maybe more broadly, not ignore it. Like, really think about what it means for your people. So as Robin said, it means that they're doing way more. So all these magic time doesn't exist. Magic times means burnout, means people like progressively not liking their job. So really thinking about that, finding workaround, addressing it, I think being fairly open about it is important. And then I think overinvest also in communication. Because all of a sudden, and you probably felt it, Emmanuel, we were 6 when we started and we all had the same idea, and that was very clear. And we didn't need to explain what our vision was. Well, all of a sudden with 120 people, guess what? You need to do that explicitly over and over again. And very often because, a month from now, it's going to be lots of new people that you need to bring into the fold. And I think like keeping that in mind constantly, and it might sound very repetitive for you as the core team that was here from the beginning, but I think it's really needed to keep kind of like cohesion and focus on the right thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's something almost wistful about this kind of growth and what you lose, because when you're 6 people or 20 people and you're all sitting around a desk and you're in one office and everybody knows everybody's name, there's something special about that you lose when you get to 120 people. So I guess my question is, like, how do you preserve that specialness of being small when you move into this rapid growth stage?
Actually, maybe you want to. Actually, it's not mandatory that you actually lose the thing that everyone knows his name. For example, we have a simple rule in the company that every 2 weeks we have a company meeting, and you take one people randomly, and he needs to actually tell 6 names of 6 random people in the 120 employees. And that's quite simple. And if it doesn't succeed, then you need to, I don't know what, but something really, really hard. So basically change every week. So basically that's a way, for example, to make sure that everyone knows the name of everyone is working with. And that's actually super important.
But that doesn't scale at a certain point.
Every time you can find ways to make it scale. When you are 6, you don't need this kind of rule. When you have 100, you need some different rule. When you have 200, 600, I'm not 600 yet. But probably you need, again, different rule, and you can scale. Do you
know the name of every employee at Blade?
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely at a phase now where you cannot know every single person who works at Instagram. And I think what ends up happening is you have to take the things that made the culture really special and cement them so that every single person can reflect those values in their everyday life. So what was awesome about working in the 10-person version of Instagram? Well, maybe it was the exciting pace. It was the way we think about product. It was kind of the mission that we were trying to do for the world. And those things you try to really stabilize so that everyone has that experience. And then I think the more interpersonal aspects become more local. And there's new atomic units at the team level that is the source of a lot of the identity. So for us, the stories team It's very close together. There's a tight-knit group that was in this war room. We were working really hard for 6 months, a year and a half ago, to make this new format for Instagram. It shipped, it's grown, and we built a bunch of new features on top of it now, from all the camera creative formats, all the new creative tools, super zoom, boomerang, etc. But this team has had this crazy identity within Instagram, and they're really tight-knit, and they probably feel like the early Instagram team as a microcosm, and I think you see that across the company.
So when is the right time then to kind of grow up and start getting more modular within your company instead of one big organic unit to distribute the teams and the cultures a little bit within the organization? What is the threshold?
Yeah, I think it's when you're really building more than one product, really. And you can define a product by, like stories as a product, feed as a product, direct as a product. But once you're doing more than, one thing, you basically need more than one team. And once you have multiple teams, communication, to Caroline's point, I think is very important. And you have to really start thinking about cementing the culture. And one thing that's, I think, overlooked, even in early startups, is defining what that culture is so that by the time you do need to scale, it's very easy. So I also was, after Google started my own company, I was a CEO of a company called Stamped. And we actually wrote a vision and our own set of values our first month with the company because we really wanted everyone to come in to have a same North Star of where we were going. And I think it's something that more and more companies could do. We really benefited from it a lot. And I don't think it's one of those things you have to wait for. And if, in fact, you get a lot of leverage from doing it as soon as possible.
Actually, I was going to bring that up, so let's talk about it now. This idea of setting forth a set of cultural values, we've seen that be very effective at a lot of companies. It's also created some problems, most conspicuously at Uber, which set these 14 cultural values under Travis Kalanick, and then Dara Khosrowshahi came in and said he had to reset the values because they had created the wrong priorities. I don't know, anybody could take this, but what is the right time to go in and set a common set of values? And what do you need to be mindful of so you don't make the mistakes that Uber seems to have made in setting its internal cultural priorities? That's a jump ball. Anybody? Caroline?
Yeah, well, I'll take that. I think as early as possible, honestly, like what is it that you fight for? What's important for you? That's actually very important to define that early on. It also helps you attract talent. Like talent get energized around a product, around a project, around a team. The values should reflect that. So I would say as early as possible. And then, you have to be thoughtful, but you can also try and change. I think it's not, and probably give you the opportunity to change them early enough is probably more of the problem than changing them. I think it's kind of like fair enough to just kind of like try and evolve. It's completely normal for me. I think probably assembling a diverse group of people to think about those values early on would be a good way to think about it. But
I think that's
just
probably a key point to bring in a
common
diverse
sense.
group, because perhaps one of the mistakes that Uber made was that was not a widely considered set of values. Looking at the way, I've done a lot of work on Amazon, they started with 4 principles very early on and then expanded to 14. And they, they're not just kind of values for the sake of values, right? They're kind of weaponized almost at Amazon to guide every hiring decision, every promotion decision, every business decision where maybe the founder and the CEO, the top executive team is not in the room.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I view principles and values as basically being another decision maker helping you make calls. Because you every day have thousands of decisions at the team level that you're trying to make, and if they're all made in a slightly different way, the ship's not going in the same direction. So I think when you create these types of principles, it's really important first that you pick what you're optimizing for. And I think it starts with your goal and what success looks like for you and your company. So for Instagram, we try to bring people closer together so that you feel like you're with your friends and family and people you care about when you can't be with them. And it's really important. It's a positive experience. It's experiential and it's visual. And so for us, we're willing to make the trade-off of going a little slower to make an experience that feels really positive and great so that you can really have this experience so you feel like you're with your friends. If you were to kind of launch a story and it were to freeze, you can't really get that experience. Unlike other utility products, maybe that's not as important. And so that type of, I think, optimization is really critical. I think the other piece, there's 2 other things I think I would think through. One is, whenever you're optimizing for one thing, you're optimizing away from something else. So, for instance, we're moving a little slower in some instances because of this, and we have to be okay with that trade. I think Uber probably has an example of by going really hard at direction A, you're kind of going against direction B, and I think just being aware of how they come in pairs is important. And the third piece is revisiting them, and I think as the company scales, you need to revisit and look at, hey, we're going really hard at this direction, and we're going away from this other direction. Do we still want to be doing that or not, based on what our objectives are as a company? And I think in some instances, like Amazon, I think they've kept a lot of their core principles the same, and it's just been added. I know Facebook's done the same. I think most of the core principles of Facebook are the same, but then a few, like 2 or 3, have been added over the years. And I think in other instances, they've been changed completely.
Emmanuel, is this resonating with you? Have you done the cultural values at Blade?
Not yet, actually. I mean,
We can set them up here on stage.
yeah,
if you
but
want.
for us, it was always it's not the time. Like you said, at some point, some people don't know the name of other people, and it will arrive probably at some point, but it's not the time yet. And actually, you see a lot of startups share the value of just changing the world, which is quite stupid, of course, it's like stereotype again. But actually, it has a meaning. You need to actually be willing to change the world if you want to advance, and at first, it's a value by itself, basically. Changing the world or making things or producing things, when you're not a lot, you don't need other values. You're just in one product, one direction, and many dreams, and that's enough. And if you succeed to actually keep that for 100 employees or more, well, it's enough. Again, when you will start to be even grow bigger, then you need to give your soft values or hard values and make sure that everyone shares something. But it's because they don't share something from the beginning, after.
Caroline and Amy, I know you probably have to be discreet about the clients and portfolio companies that you work with, but maybe you could share, one common mistake that you see hypergrowth companies making.
For me, I think one common mistake is growing too fast or wanting to grow too fast, and some of the challenges within that, and that's why I'm here. I'm like, hey guys, I know that you want to scale to the next stage, but there are appropriate systems or infrastructures that we have to put in place before then, just to accommodate personnel growth or acquiring talent, customers, or even growing products. And a good rule that I always, and going back to sort of the values and visions to help shape that, is looking at this one question that I always try to advocate for the business leaders, which is, what is your vision? What could be true in 5 years? Because that's something that will shape and really force the leaders to think about what's going on today and how can I bring my company and the products that I'm launching to meet that goal or vision.
Caroline, can you and as you answer, can you share any horror stories of grotesque mistakes made by founders that you've worked with?
Well, I think that one of the big moments for us happens when we completely transfer ownership from us to a corporate partner. I think that moment, so it's an equivalent of an acquisition, if you want. So if you're for a startup, that's both a recognition, but that's also the starting point of something that's going to feel very different. And I think that in that, and it's on both sides, right? It's how, as a founder, you manage that and you flex your organization in such a way that it's going to work out in a different context. But it's also from the standpoint of the corporate and not understanding and not respecting kind of like ways of working of startups. And I think that the acquisition play is very tempting. It's also really, really hard to make it work because fundamentally ways of working, the level of governance, the level of control, the investment in a team that you need to make as a startup, the quality of the team is not always well understood, or at least a good point of understanding, and it absolutely needs to be. So I have tons of examples. I think that's a very common one, and something to watch for if that's your company, if that's your startup. That's kind of like the moment where you cannot completely let it go. You have to fight it in a way that's constructive to really make it work and stage at a different level and grow at a different level.
Well, building off that point, I'm going to try to answer my own question. And of course, I'm a journalist and the farthest away from running an actual company. But having covered tech companies for a long time, the mistake I see hypergrowth startups making is they're building and counting on an environment that then changes underneath their own feet. So the dot-com companies in the late 90s that thought that they would have unlimited access to capital, or even the latest, upstarts who, thought that, a grow at all cost mentality would be tolerated, and then suddenly the political environment around kind of rule breaking shifted. I don't know, Robbie, if maybe you can address that, because you've also kind of seen it all. What kind of assumptions, false assumptions, can founders and entrepreneurs make in terms of the business environment that they think they're operating in?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think in order to be managing success over a long period of time, you need to be always extremely paranoid that at any point your user curve could start to slow down and actually go down, that the VC environment could absolutely dry up, that it may be hard to retain or recruit talent based on changes in the talent landscape. You kind of break down the business into some components, and you just try to really push that any main assumption you have in those could still be true. And if you're basing it on a long-term assumption, you should question that and be more defensible. I think just in doing my own company and also seeing this in a corporate environment, a larger environment as well, I think a related mistake is really just pursuing growth for growth's sake and not because the business really needs it. And it happens sometimes when you have an opportunity to raise a massive VC round, and you may actually not even need the money, but you're like, I'll take the money and we'll be fine with it. Or at a larger company, like, oh, I'll give you 100 engineers if you can pitch me a big idea. Oh, let's figure out an idea and let's get the engineers. Who cares if it's like the right thing to do or not? And it happens all the time. And I think it's just really important that as you grow with a lot of intentionality around, this is actually the opportunity we're going after. This is the group of people we need to go do it, or the resources we need to build a set of things in order to have this opportunity, and really just kind of scale the business alongside the opportunity in a more first principled way.
Emmanuel, first of all, I just feel like I need to acknowledge this bizarre menagerie of jungle animals that's behind us. I don't know, it just feels sort of appropriate to the discussion we're having. That's all, I just wanted to point it out. They're monkeys and caterpillars.
They're like moving slowly, and we're talking about
it's a little creepy.
Fast growing.
But anyways, Emmanuel, have you built this kind of versatility into your models? Are you ready for, you're riding a tremendous wave of enthusiasm about the cloud right now. You're a high growth company, but are you ready for if God forbid there were a financial crisis tomorrow, do you have a plan to adapt?
Adapting is a very interesting subject, and actually we are in the middle of it right now. From just what you said, for example, and from the assumption that you got VC giving you tons of money, and then you can hire 100 engineers because you want to be the next Google and you want to have as many people as they do. Actually, we discovered something very interesting. We did the mistake for 2 months, but after we discovered something very interesting is that if we need to sell in Germany, in UK, in the US, so we need more data centers, so the infrastructure team needs to be bigger, the marketing team needs to be bigger, the administration team needs to be bigger, and we assume, for example, that the engineers need to be bigger, which is false, totally false. Actually, we're working, and everybody knows that, much better with 5 engineers if you have one product than with 100 engineers. So that's the first thing we did last month, actually, was to take 5 engineers and saying you're responsible for the product and you're not becoming managers or so on. You're just developers and you will fix your own bugs and you will make sure that the product is perfect. And it's advancing way faster. And to come back to what you were saying, that of course the market is changing, the cloud is changing, and we are part of that, making sure that it's going in the right direction. You need to adapt, and to be able to adapt, you need to have a small team that can react super fast and talented team. If you have that, well, I assume, maybe I'm wrong, that it will be quite easy.
I think the other key thing is having the right tool set and data to know when things are changing. I think that's one thing that Facebook and Instagram does very, very well. But if you see there's a metrics drop in a key market or sales are coming in a little bit soft in one country, that's, I think, the biggest precondition to then being adaptive and moving fast. And I think a big challenge is companies just get caught totally flat-footed and not understand what's happening around them, and then it's usually too late to actually fix it.
Amy, a lot of fast-growing internet companies, they hire engineers, right? They take their time when it comes to things like human resources and the legal department, what they might see as sort of non-core talent. What is the right time in any kind of fast-growing company to go and start to think about kind of scaling an HR organization, getting not startup talent, but professional talent into your organization?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And when you have a small core team, you start with people that are jack of all trades that can do basically like 10 things. You have one manager that may do HR, may do a little legal, may do marketing, may sign, whatever. And so I think when you get to that point where you're not focusing on your key products that you're launching and you're losing revenue because of that, that's kind of like a turning point. You're like, we really need to get somebody in here to focus and specialize on getting HR and getting hiring talent or doing legal things.
Early on, I would say, that's also the person who can help with the culture, the person who can help kind of like lay the foundation for that kind of like super growth, right? So you don't want to do that obviously too early, cash consciousness and all of that, but when you start recruiting, seeing kind of like an increased need for new people and you need to accelerate recruiting, that's a good moment to create some room for the founders so that they can focus and the key people so that they can focus on product, they can focus on the growth, and then you take care of someone else, like the HR person takes care of that kind of like more people foundation that will help to grow later on, to grow faster.
Let's follow up on that point, because I think it's an important one. I guess the question is, when is the right time for the founder to let go? To stop micromanaging the heck out of every hire, every promotion, every decision? When as a founder, do you step back and say, we're growing too fast, and it's hard to do, right? Because you achieve your success by micromanaging and knowing every name, making every decision. I don't know, at what level does the founder have to start to scale herself or himself?
Yeah, so I worked really closely with Kevin over the last couple of years in this exact question, and I think one of the biggest things I've learned, and I think we've learned as an organization, is I think you always want to be spending your time in the way that's highest leverage for your company and your business. And when you feel like you're ending up spending a lot of time in areas just to keep things operationally going, and at the same amount of time spent somewhere else could be very multiplicative to a business result or very high leverage for hiring a whole group of people or doing an acquisition, you realize you probably need to rethink how we're spending time. And I think over the last 2 years, Instagram has been a great example of a company that's gone from a very founder-driven product organization to one much more user-driven and product org-oriented. And a lot of it's been from what we've talked about in establishing the principles and the Instagram way of building product that we're starting to really create a DNA around. But I think that's probably the main focus, is how you spend your time and what else you could be doing with it.
Wise words, but a koala is frolicking behind you, so it's a little
hard to take me seriously.
It's a little hard to know. Emmanuel, back to putting you on the hot seat. When do you feel like you need to start to let go a little bit?
Actually, very fast. You cannot manage everything, and of course you're sure that you're the best in marketing, in development, in administration, in communication. You cannot manage everything for sure. And for me, I'm kind of a control freak, so it was very, very hard to actually let go. I mean, it's my baby. Everybody can fuck up. So me, myself, but I can. Me, it's not a big deal. I know myself, but so it was very hard. And the only way, actually, I found to actually let go is to step away, like physically, to go away, very far away, and then you see if things are working and things start to work. If you're there, they will just work around you. But if you're not there, they will start to work by themselves, because you have very talented people and you need to actually have faith in them.
I think that's
Take a vacation, in other words.
That's great, right?
Caroline.
I think that's a great point. I think the moment is it's obviously how you use your time, how to best use your time, but it's also thinking about the implication for the talented people that you hired, right? Because then if you're making all the decision, then you leave them with nothing. You leave them with execution, things that they might not fully own, and that's where demotivation happens, and that's when you're going to be on your own, right? So really thinking about it also as it's a human organization, right? So what you're starting is obviously a product and impact, but it's also a human organization. So how to create and make that community live.
Yeah, and going back to Caroline's point about it's a human organization, and you want to empower your employees, you want to trust them and allow them to do, you hired them for a reason, so you want them to flourish and basically bring their expertise and provide their expertise to whatever you're delivering at that point.
So I would like to invite all of you guys to ask our panel some questions. So please open the Slido app or go to the Slido website and submit a question here for the startup stage. I'll ask one more, and then I'm going to turn to Slido. Caroline, let me put this one to you. Small, fast-moving companies tend to have pretty casual environments, right? They work long hours, they work weekends. Sometimes these small, intimate groups, like to party together. They're informal environments. In this day and age, right, where we now have some pretty stringent standards for professional behavior in the workplace, when's the right time to grow up? When's the right time for a company to say, okay, well, we can't have alcohol at night in the office is maybe not a great idea?
Well, to me, it's all about, and it's true at any stage, like creating the safe environment for your people. When you're a group of 10 folks who are your friends from the beginning, you know naturally what this safe environment is. And you don't need to put many rules around it. That's fairly intuitive. Like, I don't have rules with my friends. I know them, and it's kind of like fairly easy. And I also have very direct communication. What the safe environment means when you're a bigger group with people that you don't know, that you don't interact with on just a personal level, but mostly on a professional level, that the definition is going to be different. And I really think that it's all about, what you might interpret as, it was just a drink, or it's just a comment. It's not what you think. It's how it can be perceived in the eyes of the other person. So always taking the higher ground and anticipating what can happen, I think, is important. It doesn't mean that nothing can be said, nothing can be done. It's not a friendly or personal, authentic environment. I don't think these things are necessarily completely correlated. But finding other ways to engage in a way, in a safe manner is really important. I think it's much more like the type of relationship that you had from the beginning and the type of group. Is it mostly friends? Is it mostly professional? And then how does the definition of safe need to evolve over time?
Robbie, in your company that you founded, did you have to think about that? Like, when is the right time to start to create a more professional environment in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think very early on, we were always a company that was really driven by the products we were building, and I think just in general didn't have as much of, like, I needed work separation in my life, like personally, like as a human. So like I was always, whenever we would do like drinks or try to do fun things, we did it out of the office and always tried to be like very professional about it. But I think you basically get to a place pretty quickly where you have to set a standard early so that endures, and then everyone coming in knows that, hey, this is a team and a company that's got the right expectations around behavior. And it's really important to set that as day one.
Okay, Emmanuel, we have a Slido question for you. How did you manage the launch of Shadow in the US while France was in hypergrowth? Any particular challenges to launch a cloud-based product abroad? And is Shadow...
Shadow is our product, yes.
Is your product, okay.
The computer
the
we're
Blade
selling
product.
is named Shadow.
Got it.
So, yeah, that was quite a challenge actually. We are three founders. One is my cousin, and he's from Israel, and he took the lead of the US part. And it was very interesting because in France we had hypergrowth, so having 100 employees, but at the same time in US it was very a startup style. A small office in the Silicon Valley, Palo Alto. They were just at the beginning 2 or 3. And running in a startup mode where we had, because again, many employees, many things, many process and things, we had to work in a more, let's say, grown-up phase. So at the beginning, communication was a bit hard, but then we quickly decided that everyone in US, this was a startup. This was a startup, and you need to have faith in what they are doing, and they need to understand that the pace will be a bit slow on our side. So they can, whatever they want to have quick, they do it in a startup style. They're doing it by themselves. Whatever they need from us in a reasonable way, in a more constructive way, then you're doing with the normal processes and things. And actually, it worked very well, and they went from 2 to 20 employees in Palo Alto.
You know, that reminds me actually of something similar that Airbnb did in its international growth initiative. You know, they also had the fortune of 3 founders, and they operated sort of independently, and they went and they created these sort of independent overseas offices that then they allowed to kind of grow somewhat independently at their own pace.
Yeah, I mean, between Silicon Valley and Paris, you have 9 hours delay. So that's quite a big shift to actually communicate in a reasonable way. And when you finish one day of work, you don't need to have 2 hours on phone with your cousin, that you love, by the way, but still. So it was it's very, very important to have faith, like total faith, in the way other people are actually doing mistakes or leading what they're doing. And that's what helps.
A follow-up question from Slido. Do you see subcultures then evolving or emerging in these different teams? And what do you do if they're, you know, if they end up being in conflict or incompatible with each other?
I mean, it's human. There's people there. So of course you have subcultures that start to emerge and different way of being upset by things or by finding normal. I mean, in France we are late. That's a normal thing. We are late by 10, 20, 30 minutes. It's okay. It's okay to make people wait for us, which is absolutely not something acceptable in all over countries, because that's not acceptable. So we need to learn from each other, and the only thing that we have to do is to learn by the fun way and to make sure that it's fun. As long as it's fun and you share the same passion, you have subcultures, but it's okay, and it's something that you can make fun with.
But that's where the point about the culture and the vision and the values is so important, right? So if you're and you said, as long as we have something and we're united by a shared vision, it's a culture, it's the values, then you can have some small different identities and some tweaks and some personalities and some other things. But as long as you're united by these shared of common values, common vision, I think that's fine.
Totally true. I mean, the main issue is that people start to be bored. And that's when they start to fight each other. If they are not bored, if they are working, and if they have belief in something, there's no issue at all.
Robbie, really quickly, you're asked about Instagram's international growth model, whether you guys open local offices or you just kind of ride on Facebook's infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, in general, our product is a global product that we want everyone in the world to use to come closer together. And then I think our physical footprint is supposed to really just reflect how we can better achieve that mission. And so whatever is the easiest way for us to scale our presence where needed, we'll do it. I think we frequently will try to coordinate with Facebook infrastructure just so that we're not repeating work. But Instagram has also its own kind of areas and kind of just general office approach. So we have a bunch of offices now in the US, for instance, in a bunch of cities, internationally, regionally, and we try to coordinate where we can.
Well, we're running out of time, so let me ask one question, and maybe you could all get a last word in. Is hypergrowth, you know, always the ideal? Like, are there ever situations where staying small, being more measured, is a preferable alternative?
I think sometimes. I think it depends on the arc of the company. Like, I know when Instagram was acquired, I think it was like 10 people or something. So there's like a value of kind of staying focused. I think when you stay smaller, you're just more, it's another way of saying stay focused, because as you get larger, you just lose your focus. So I think personally like managed growth that's very intentional, that's still focused on a very clear point of view and where you're taking things, but growing around it. Feels like the right place. And sometimes waiting a little bit before you make that leap just keeps that certainty that you're not jumping into something before you're ready for it.
Yeah, I would say that hypergrowth is not a choice, actually. And if it is a choice, you should not take it. Probably it means that it's better to stay small.
Yeah, I would have to agree that being intentional with growth is extremely important. And going back to Emmanuel's point, going into hypergrowth is great for your company, but if you're not ready for it, there are a lot of considerations that you have to make before entering in there so that you can be prepared to actually meet that growth. And if you don't have that infrastructure in place, then you can actually maybe hurt yourself a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree with all those points.
Okay, well, Caroline, Amy, Emmanuel, Robbie, thank you guys, and thank you to the monkeys and the koalas frolicking behind us, and thank you all for joining us today.